introduction because it's a very familiar face for all of us. And very early in life, she got an International Writers Program in Iowa, fellow of IAS, and recipient of several awards. And now she is the guest editor for Indian literature. Sukrita ji, we are really honored to have you here. And we have for you, the first is the launch, and then we have readings from your book, and the last part will be translations in many different vernaculars. I think that will give the taste of India, because you are also doing that job in your Indian literature, and this evening we'll give you a taste of your poetry translated into other Indian languages.
Familiar with the book already or not, but in the book I have a kind of a preface, prefatory note or whatever, where I don't know if I talk about yellow itself, but it was as simple as why the title yellow. It was as simple as the fact that I have a painting. I don't usually use yellow paint. I don't know why I don't, but here, when I was obsessed with the laburnum trees, which grow in a whole street outside my house, and it comes as a very short-lived reality because it's in summer, early summer, that you see these trees and the blossom and the bloom of laburnums, yellow, very delicate, combating with the hot yellow of the sun, It's that yellow and it's this yellow. And you see them hanging as if, very delicately, very casually, and very conscious, unconscious state kind of situation, Not any deliberation on it. And I would watch that for hours. I have done that actually, just watch them dangling, like from the branches, and then there comes a time very soon that they are all down when they fall, and the road becomes yellow, So you cannot but look at that yellow, and I imbibed it so much that I painted laburnum trees, and this is actually the cover is from my painting, and Divya designed it. He took the painting from me, and then he put it like that, both the sides. And I think he did a good job because he didn't cut out any portion as such. It's a large painting, big painting, and it's kind of stands out in the house because all other paintings are dark, and this is a very bright one coming through. So that's why when the book happened and the cover happened, and then obviously publishers are always wanting 2-3 things. One is give your preface first. And you get fed up of that. Why should you have to write a preface all the time? But yes, it's a good idea, because now I feel it's a good idea because every time you have to write a preface, and if you want to do it really authentically and sincerely, it becomes a kind of a confession and loud thinking. And you start thinking to yourself as to why you are doing whatever you are doing. I don't know why you are writing poetry. I don't know what poetry is, how it's going to be received. There is an unknown aspect of it which I think intrigues one to write, actually. It's that unknown. And I find it very interesting that in my foreword, and I was looking at it today in the afternoon before you came to see me, and I immediately said, look at this phrase, and I hope I'm able to get it here somewhere. Yeah. So I said, there is an undefined anticipation in the way one is dealing with poemlets. And there is a difference between, now you might ask, what are these poemlets? Why are you calling them poemlets? Are they incomplete little poems? Because poems need space to develop. You know, you need to write a little logically, even if it's not a story, but hidden behind is a whole narrative. So you're dealing with line by line, word by word, you are dealing with that tool of words. And in these words, what are you doing? You're basically, and I wrote a book which was before this, which was called Vanishing Words. And I'm obsessed with that. How do I make words vanish? I don't want not only just surplus, but I also want to see to it that more and more words are gotten rid of, you know. How can that happen? Because then the experience has to be compressed, meaning has to be compressed, not suppressed. If it is suppressed, then you're going wrong. Something is going wrong then in your expression. But the condensation that needs to happen is what is ultimately going to make it seem like incomplete, and perhaps it is incomplete. And I'm saying that in my book. It is incomplete. Take it, it's incomplete, because I want you, the reader, to complete it. At dawn today, in the jungle, Kauravas and Pandavas stood ready for battle. War cries rose from kikar bushes. The winds whistled, beckoning the golden chariot to arrive with reason and light and suspend the daily Mahabharata to start the next day. This is a series called Silence. Silence is the prime meridian. All time starts from there. Silence is a vertical line that runs through the spine. All energy rises from there. Silence is the stillness of the universe. All movement evolves from there. I'll just read one more from here. Silence, and this I find cute, so I'm reading. Silence is the baby suckling her mother's breast. All cries of hunger lie drowned. You see how the little baby is at that time suckling.
Sukrita also, in her preface, she was talking about her preface, and I must say the preface is very important in this book. In her preface says, yellow says, I quote, small is beautiful. It is in the silences that lie between the lines, around the images, metaphors that evoke the reader's participation. The reader's participation in the birthing of yet another poem from the one received. Quote, unquote. Now, so I think particularly that the poemlets in yellow are double creative. Creativity which starts, the poet gives birth to the poem, the poemlet rather. Those two-liners, not one line, I don't think there are one-liners, two-liners, three-liners, or even short poems. The poet gives birth to those poems, but it moves over to the reader, and over there also it takes it's over there that it takes its final shape. So just now, Sukrita said something which, it's an eye-opener for all of us who are writing. She said just now that there's something about, while in creativity, some sort of self-effacement should be there. Even the negation of the name, the name of the poet. I mean, it should be a participation, what do you call it? It should be a journey from the the author's mind to the mind of the reader. Well, now it is from this, just now the quote that I just now read out from the preface, well, from it it's obvious that the silences embedded in these weak poems invite the participatory role of the readers. It opens up avenues for creative engagement with those said and or written and unwritten words. And the minimality of words render the poemlets incomplete, as she just now mentioned. It is incomplete in a way, as she herself says, and it becomes a whole. It achieves its completeness in the imagination, in the reader's imagination, in the sensibility of the reader, where the silence merges.
Poemlets, and I'm so glad that Sukrita spoke first, because you spoke about several things. Because the moment you think of short poems, one always thinks of the haiku and the other form poems, which you referred to as well. And there is one similarity which you once again referred, where you speak about creating an image, an emotion. When I was reading the poems, I was fascinated by the very short form that you used for the poems, because I think the brevity of the poem brings in at times an urgency. It creates kind of vignette of lived reality. It at times takes one on a journey. And I was also reminded, as you were talking actually, I was reminded of the very form of the poem that's called a fragment, right? And that reminded me, as you were talking actually, where you speak about sometimes the poems are incomplete, or are they really incomplete, is something that we readers, when we read, we find ending somewhere, we come across our own meanings. And the idea of the fragment was coming up when you were talking. I just want to I will read one poem. It's called War Vignettes, but I'm not going to read the one that Amitadi read. And as I was reading, I thought I would speak a little bit about this poem. And this is how this poemlet goes. It's dementia. For grandmother, it's a staccato war, ending each day to start the next morning. It is a rewind to World War II. The wake of bombing kills people 70 years later. What I find fascinating about this poem is how Sukrita has brought this condition of dementia to speak of the lived reality of life. There's a jumbling up of memories, which is what happens when one has the condition of dementia, where the old, the present, it's a fuzzy kind of memory. And all of these exist together in the mind to come up at various points of time. And I found the way you use this to be very, very interesting, because when war is recollected in a fading memory, it also brings up, as you write in the lines, there is, you refer to the fading of memory because you refer to dementia in the poem, but it also comes back to the reality of lived existence, to the several wars that are around us, happening around us. And I was thinking of how, as the borders blur, meanings still remain, emerging stronger, I felt, just as it happens in someone who has dementia, because there are moments when there's perfect cognition, when you're able to understand things just the way they are, but there are moments when everything is mixed up. And through these moments, there are times when truths emerge, truths that need to be told, that need to be paid heed to, that need to be remembered. I found this particular poem very fascinating as I was reading the poems, because You bring in several ideas, and I would never think of this poem as an incomplete one. And I also found the way in which you use words in the poem. For instance, staccato, that is one word which I really liked in the poem, because when one has the condition of dementia, there is also this loss of words, this searching for a word, this using of a wrong word in a place where it doesn't go. So I've never found anything to be incomplete out there. I found it made complete sense. Parvata, Akkada, Meshala Madhya, Nijaniki Atyanta Nelevunchuti, Atyanta Nirdishta, Adina Badhalage, Ananda Bharitamaina Nityamto, Manusagu Vesukundi, Mariyu Praja Madhya Navvulu. Thank you.
Buddha in neighborhood is the key to unlock the yellow, a collection of short poems. Nature dominates, work creeps in, and silence rules. Silence that is eloquent. Spaces in between the lines, the small stanzas and words. The words are placed in such a way that each of the words is a world. Like, I'm tempted to read the same lines that Sukrita ma'am has read. Silence is the prime meridian, and all time starts from there. There is almost a clinical precision, and there is a lingering effect, in peace with death and life as a continuum. Riverine tunes are hard, while the capital I, that is ego or arrogance, is immersed, perhaps in the river of life. And Sukrita ma'am chooses to, I quote, go farther away from the land into the sea, confident and steady, unquote, with all humility and not with arrogance. This is something which I have learned a lot while I was going through these poemlets. The poet has also almost done away with punctuations. There is a steady flow of ideas, like a rising prayer, like her papa's clasp of palm, steadfast forever after he has left. Blue, yellow, silver, green, all the colors in these poemlets come together seamlessly to form stunning poetic designs. With these poemlets, Sukrita ma'am has redrawn the boundaries of poetry.
Attracted me when I got this book yellow was not just the color, but what follows the title, which is the description, the genre. It mentions that it's a collection of poemlets, new and earlier. So the poet refers to her pieces as poemlets. Poemlets, little poems, or maybe fragments of poems, little particles of poems. When I was thinking about this, when I was pondering, something happened. As you all know, November was a little sad for us, because for us, all Indians and Bengalis, because we lost one of the finest Tagore scholars, and that was William Radici. So as it always happens, when we lose somebody, we tend to go over his or her works afresh. So I read this essay titled An Introduction to Particles, Jottings, Sparks by Rabindranath Tagore by Radici. Here Radici says that Tagore had coined the term kobitika or poemlet, a diminutive of kobita, which of course means poem. And Radici speaks about the brief poems of Tagore, stating that brief is more absolute than short. And he also says that short is a variable term. And then he goes on to say that we may say that there are very short poems. What about the poems in her book, Yellow? We as readers may also refer to them as short, and some of them are really very short. Interestingly, exactly 125 years back, Tagore brought out a collection titled Konika. This was 1899. So once again you see Konika is a diminutive of Kona, which means that if Kona means particle, Konika would refer to an even smaller particle. So back to her again from Tagore. Madam Sukrita Paul Kumar herself says small is beautiful in her introduction. And she also says that words can lift you to a world beyond. They can connect you with the living and the non-living, but they can also completely alienate you from the known reality. And this is precisely what happens in the Buddha poems. Buddhism believes in 4 noble truths: the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path that leads to the end of suffering. And Sukrita Paul Kumar's poems also speak of the suffering that affects humans. But no, it's not just about suffering. She also speaks about peace of mind, the absolute shanti that the Upanishads also mention.
I think, especially when you're talking about the postmodern poet, where perhaps, what kind of language, and how should we express ourselves itself is a kind of a cultural, political premise that we are all caught in. Therefore, when she is very concise, she chooses her words with complexity. I can see that her engagement is not only with the natural world, but also with a political and social individual identity. By calling, I was also struck by, of course, the book has, of course, a subtitle which is called New and Earlier. This word earlier, the newness is, I think, in the very earlier context that she talks about, the natural world, the cycles of growth and decay, which provides a kind of a reflection on human light. Now, if you're talking about the color itself is very interesting. By choosing a color which has its own dynamics. You look at yellow as something which is sunlight, which is hope, which is bright, which is joy. But then it is also decay, it is also deception, it is also cowardice. So therefore, there are a lot of transient beliefs. And of course, once again, as a reader, you look at these suggestions, that each moment perhaps is an image which is feeding you. It is talking about, participating and filling in, the gap. I would just like to read, a para of this very small poemlet, as she calls, which is titled "We the Homeless." I was reading this, slapping the dust of himself, the little boy queried his eyes, rolling in hope. You can interpret hope here. And then it ends with, into my vacant face, filling me fiercely with motherhood. A feminism, I believe, is very subtle, where perhaps, you are rather talking about the human condition. You're feeling people, through this poem, I think with a sound of promise, because you talk about the inevitability of change. This juxtaposition between light and decay is emblematic of the broader tension which this volume celebrates: loss, creation, and destruction. Yellow, as the title suggests, I think operates not only as a color, but as a potent symbol. In literature and in visual arts, yellow can represent a spectrum of meanings ranging from optimism to vitality. But here, I think in the poem, they transcend the simple dichotomy of brightness versus dimness. It emerges as a color that can simultaneously evoke warmth, hope, creativity, fragility, vulnerability, and everything. So within this, what I find is that there is color, there is memory, there is identity, there is employing of a compact space, the temporality, and through the central motive, you can talk about this multifacetedness in a multiple way. So the style is minimalistic, and perhaps, in a world where perhaps, we are silent about a lot of things, therefore this minimalistic approaches is like, twigging you to what you should be responding to. So she's creating those responses for us. So as a poet, the journey of a poet, we have critics who have argued, who have seen or imagined poet as creators. But today perhaps we are also talking about the poets as activists. I would like to see this poem as a volume of activism, where perhaps, where we have fallen silent on many issues, where we have, perhaps stopped having dialogues with many things. Here is a voice, prominent, clear. We talk about the minimalism, but I think they are not very complex. They invite you to imagine, they invite you to speak. And I end with this, not
scared of living homeless. The sick man lay terrified of dying without a home. So here to this volume of poems which calls us not to be afraid, not to be losing hope, is that the most spoken word this evening is silence. And I would be sharing with you my impressions that this book has left with me. Good evening, everyone. I feel lucky and very humbled to find myself among the stalwarts with an opportunity to speak about my responses to reading Sukrita ma'am's book of poemlets, Yellow. Let me tell you what struck me most in the collection is a very easy blend of the vast and the minuscule, the momentary and the momentous. The poet speaks most enigmatically, I believe, from her experiences with a marked economy of diction which opens them into the realm of universal multiple possibilities of interpretations as it has been discussed earlier. But other than discussions, I feel, interpretations, I feel it is more about opening possibilities of spinning more words from the silences. And that brings me to the second of my observation, something which has been discussed much. The poet's significant use of the word silence as a presence, a space, which underscored by her minimalist structure actually becomes more immersive and sensory for the readers. She uses lines like rings of silence, packed in silence, pierce the silence, which I think resonates in bigger circles of eloquence. I also wish to put in 3 examples here which I remembered as I was reading these poems. One is coming from the lines I would just like to, I don't want to misquote. That is, silence is the movement between one note and the next. All sound is impregnated within. What I'm reminded of is, you know, in music, in between 2 notes, there are multiple minuscule fractions of notes, and they are called shrutis. In between shor, there are shrutis, and every shruti has pause in between. So without pause, without silence, sounds cannot exist. That is one thing I remembered. I also remembered another thing, that is Virginia Woolf's The Voyage Out, that one sentence which always remained with me. I want to write a novel on silence, things people don't say. So I continuously, you know, kept on thinking when I was reading your poems. And another thing, as ma'am said, very coincidental, because while reading ma'am's poems, I was actually thinking of Rabindranath Tagore's Sfulingo, not Konika but Sfulingo, and one very rare poem from Sfulingo, which I think I will, it's very difficult for me to actually explain and translate, but I will read just the 4 lines and then try to, you know, emphasize on the last 2. Obokash podde bani roche padopit, shei podde chhidro roche tuchho bakko kit. So, you know, the silence is like a lotus where the words are like small insects. Somehow, while reading your poems, I felt like that. You know, it's actually the bigger picture is silence. The words only creeping. So that's all I have to say.
Of this book. The first thing that struck me is why yellow. I thought of North India. I thought of Rang de Vasant. I thought of yellow representing Indian culture. The Western culture's interpretation of yellow is very different from our own. Western culture's interpretation of yellow can be one of optimism, but it can be also one of great depression. And since there is not much time, I will read out a few lines from one of my not just favorite poet, a poet who is iconic for me, and that's Percy Bysshe Shelley. Ode to the West Wind. I think all of you have taught it or wrote answers in exams on it, whether you liked it or not. So, O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's be, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven like ghosts from an enchanter flea. Yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitudes. What does Sukrita do? Pestilence-stricken multitudes. That is how yellow is represented. I looked for something in terms of finding a sort of a different interpretation in Sukrita's poems about yellow. And these are the lines I came across, which thankfully none of you read. These were two little yellow mushrooms, solid and fragile, sprout from the roots of an unknown tree, bearing the whole sun within. I thought only an artist could write this. Yes? Because unless you are able to see beyond the words into something so visual, so visually vibrant, it will not be possible. And here Shelley must shame himself a little. Yes? So he wrote it with gusto. Yes? In terms of pestilence-stricken multitudes. But Sukrita, with her immersion in Indian culture, as she referred to the Vedas, I would also refer to the Upanishads, which has a phrase of being a detached participant. To remain detached and yet remain a participant. Not exile yourself up into the Himalayas, but be here and yet remain detached every moment of your life. And that really is the spirit of the